This is the survey that we hand to participants in our workshops. Our workshops are for refugees and Germans and deal with conflict resolution and mental health. As such, the survey contains questions on mental health and conflict skills. In our very first workshop, we handed out this survey, and an elderly German lady called Anne stood up and already had 2 conflicts. One, why am I being given a survey, and who the hell are you anyways? So our first workshop was off to a really good start, and Seb and I were ready to call it a day and leave. But then we took a deep breath and we remembered why we were doing this. So why are we doing this? Let me tell you. When the so-called refugee crisis happened here, I wasn't even there. I was doing my LLM in conflict resolution in California. So seeing it all unfold in the news, I feel very detached from it. I felt guilty that I was privileged enough to study where the sun was always shining. And how could I be of help being so far away? So I wanted to apply my knowledge on conflict management and somehow make it applicable to where it was needed the most. That's why I was thinking, what could I do? Well, empowering affected communities is a big thing in the United States. It works, for example, in prisons, that communities become empowered to manage their own conflicts and learn skills on how to do that. That's why I developed the concept to apply this to refugee shelters where locals and refugees learn to manage their own conflict. Now, on this quest, I stumbled across the term of psychological trauma quite often, and fortunately, my brother here has studied neuroscience, and we had a little bit of a nerd out about it.
Yeah, so thank you, Helen. I usually feel like my sister doesn't care too much about my opinion, but in this case, I could tell that this was something very close to her heart and that she was really onto something. I'm a senior med student here at the Charité University Hospital in Berlin, and thus typically spend my day on the patient wards, dealing with patient cases on a case-by-case basis and through a quite practice-oriented lens. But what I also came to realize throughout my studies was that there are so many other factors that have a direct impact on my health, on your health, and the health of whole populations. So think about, for example, social determinants of health, environmental factors, economic factors, and legal aspects that will ultimately dictate our health. It was the famous physician, Rudolf Virchow, who actually was a graduate of Humboldt University in medicine, who once said that medicine is a social science and politics is nothing else but medicine on a larger scale. So I felt remembered of that when Helen approached me with this concept, because this concept is very much also a public health issue. And it is a concept that is so powerful that, if implemented properly, could really elicit systemic change and perhaps change the lives of whole populations. And so, discussing this concept, we delved deeper into the topic of mental health. And we then realized that this was becoming a real epidemic among refugees here in Europe. And at the same time, it's also a super complex issue, because it's not only the individual who suffers in an intense emotional and physical burden as a consequence of the trauma, but it also leads to conflicts within communities. It's actually a main driver for conflict, and it can be a permanent barrier to successful integration. So if we really had this idea of preventing and managing conflict, if we really wanted to address this holistically, we had to make sure that we addressed trauma as well. And so this is when we co-founded Resolute last year, our Berlin-based startup, together with our 2 other co-founders, Kyle and Jack. We made sure that trauma was part of the agenda, and we came up with a simple mission: to empower refugees and community members to effectively manage and prevent conflict in their own communities. How would we do that? Well, by designing and developing and implementing a series of interactive workshops that would focus on conflict competency, mental health awareness, and dialogue work. Why dialogue work? It seems kind of basic. Yes, it is basic, and that is precisely the point. Because human interaction, having a dialogue, actually listening to another person, and being empathetic and compassionate is something that is so fundamental that it makes us human in the first place. But you see, in today's society, many of us have, this, and we just all spend more time during the day looking at a screen than actually engaging in dialogue. And, this is on the one side convenient because I don't need to reply to all of the WhatsApp messages, and I can just ignore confrontation and unpleasant conversations, but it also leads us down a slippery slope, and we now find ourselves in a world that is increasingly more polarized and yet seems to care less and less about this genuine human interaction. So what to do? Well, we are here today to tell you that there is still hope, and that all of you, together with us in this room, we can all work on reclaiming our own humanity.
Now, reclaiming humanity sounds like an impossible task, doesn't it? Where do we even start? Well, how about I offer a simple answer? How about talking with and not about one another? How about embracing difficult conversations and not avoiding them? Meet Ahmed. Ahmed is a 26-year-old Syrian refugee, and he is going to the local language cafe here in Neukölln, and he's in search of a job. The first time that Ahmed was discriminated against at the job center by the official, he was called a donkey. The second time, the same official told him to get his brain checked out. And the third time, he was simply being thrown out of the office. Now, after the sixth attempt, Ahmed stopped going to the job center altogether. He withdrew in his room and he totally isolated himself, not engaging with anyone anymore. So, who of you here has been in a situation where you felt less powerful than a person that was treating you unfairly? That's a lot of people. I bet almost everyone has been in such a situation. I myself was in such a situation where university administrators had actually denied a straightforward application for months, almost over half a year. And that application was very crucial to my future career, but also to financial security. And in your case, it could have been your boss, your landlord, your professor, anyone, really. And these situations leave us stranded and dependent, especially if your life lies in the hands of someone else. Now, what Ahmed really wanted in this situation was to know how to react. How can he defend himself? And why is his case still different to our situations? Because of the circumstances he's in. He is coming to an unfamiliar country. He doesn't know the language. He doesn't have family or friends to support him. He lives in an overcrowded shelter. And there's really no one to help him here in this situation. So, how did he react? Well, simply by doing nothing. Simply by leaving and withdrawing. And we all know what it feels like when we are in a difficult conversation and we withdraw and we fail. And the other way around, our friend suddenly stops talking to us and we don't know why, because we don't talk anymore. So we ask ourselves, okay, how does it feel? We blame ourselves for being incapable to engage in dialogue, and we become victims of our own situation. We become passive. And normally, Ahmed would not have shared such a story with anyone because it was very painful to talk about something like this, and because, he doesn't have anyone to talk to. So, in dispute resolution, 3 things are important, and that is trust, awareness, and empowerment. Trust means that you're comfortable enough to share your problems with one another in a setting of safe space. And awareness means that you know and understand the person that you talk to, that you know where they're coming from, their perspectives and their backgrounds, and why they behave in a certain way. And empowerment means to actually use this knowledge and shape an argument in the way that you want it, navigate through a difficult conversation. So in practice, it looks this way. In our workshops, we actually do role plays that trigger trust. We do little games, little activities that are fun before we pair our participants and they talk about a recent conflict they had in their lives. And then, because it's much easier to talk to a person that's just one person instead of a whole group. So he opened up to a stranger first, and then he talked to the entire workshop and knew, okay, this was a problem that I was having. And this is why we need a safe space. And in our awareness exercises, we actually do role plays that are very related to real life scenarios. For example, cultural misunderstandings. Consider this example. A German person walks into a job interview and a Liberian person walks into a job interview here in Germany. The German person walks in, head up, straight eye contact, firm handshake. And that is polite here in Germany. The Liberian person walks in, his head lowered, loose handshake, no eye contact, because that is polite in Liberia. But who gets the job here in Germany? If the interviewer might think this person is weak because he doesn't look me in the eye, the German will likely get the job. So it is so important to become aware of these little factors in conflict, such as power, culture, or conflict dynamics in general. And when we become aware of these factors, we can actively shape an argument, we can actively shape the outcome of a fight, of a conflict, and we can engage in more peaceful discussions. And that's actually what we did in the situation with Ahmed. With Ahmed, it was the case that he then, in the group, brainstormed about solutions, and he actually claimed a solution himself. That was, he asked himself, what if I had simply asked the official and told him how his words made me feel? What if I told him and puzzled him that actually his words hurt me deeply and saddened me? And in such situation, nobody would expect someone to say that, right? So Ahmed was empowered to actively do something about this, and more importantly, in the future, he will be able to reclaim parts of his life.
So in our workshops, what we also observe is that traumatized individuals like Ahmed tend to be more frequently involved in arguments and in violent conflicts. They also seem to struggle more with control over their own emotions, and they struggle with social interaction. Now, Ahmed's story is one of many, but it's one that had a profoundly humbling impact on us. Out of his family, Ahmed is actually the only one who made it to Germany. His father got tragically killed in the war in Syria. His brother got thrown into jail there. And his mom and sisters, they also didn't make it, and they remained thousands of miles far in a war-torn country. Most refugees, the vast majority of refugees really entering Europe, have witnessed these traumatic events. They first flee their home country. They flee war and prosecution. They then embark on an incredibly stressful journey to Europe that is oftentimes life-threatening and existential. And they then end up in a new environment with all of the challenges that Helen told you about. So as a consequence, many refugees end up suffering from mental ill health, including conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. But mental health is a topic that concerns us all. If you look at studies that look at Germany, and we check out the statistics, we find that actually 1 in 3 people, every third person in their lifetime, will develop a mental health condition and struggle with mental health. So think about that for a second. In this room, every third person, if I were to do a count, is 1, 2, 3, you would be affected. 1, 2, 3, you would be affected. It can go on all day. So it's a very, very abundant problem. And the truth is that trauma can happen to any one of us at any time. Now, some of you will have already witnessed the death of a beloved person, including us. And this is an undescribable pain that you feel, but also it can really go beyond that because it can shatter your worldview, and it can really, really throw you off balance like nothing before. And so this is why it's so crucial to address mental health in this particular setting. Now, for Ahmed, he had actually witnessed both. He had lost his family members, and at the same time, he had also been exposed to the horrors of violence and war. When I asked Ahmed about it, if he had sought any help for these issues he was experiencing, so Ahmed was troubled with nightmares and with panic attacks on an almost daily basis. So when I asked him about this, he simply shook his head. He hadn't spoken to anyone about it. And he could tell that I was a bit puzzled by this. Why hadn't he seen a counselor? Why hadn't he spoken to a friend? But he then told me that actually many of his peers experienced similar problems, and none of them will talk about it either. In fact, many have developed an alcohol habit or take drugs regularly just to deal with the stress. So this is a really problematic issue. And when we hosted this workshop with Ahmed, I was thinking, okay, how can we even help Ahmed here? Like, what could we possibly do? Because this seems like such a complex issue to address. You see, it's not just an awareness problem, but it's also people struggle with access to mental health services. They have social barriers. They have language barriers. But when we thought about this, we realized that perhaps what we could help with was awareness. Awareness that Ahmed himself would be put in a position where he could share a part of his story with the group. And I left that day from the workshop thinking, okay, we're not really making a big difference here. But it only occurred to me later that really we had begun to make a difference, because we had designed a workshop that was focused on creating this awareness. We had provided somehow a safe space where Ahmed could open up to other people about his struggles and to verbalize the problems that he had faced, and as a consequence, gain more clarity. And when then we approached him in the workshop and told him about some of the local counseling services available to him here in Berlin, he readily listened, and he also participated in some of the arts sessions and the mindfulness exercises that we did that day. So it really seemed to come down to a fundamentally neglected need that has been unaddressed, and that is awareness of the trauma itself. If Ahmed hadn't been aware that trauma exists, how can he possibly become empowered and to reach a position where he could seek treatment? If he doesn't know that it exists, if he doesn't know that it's okay that it exists and that he has it, if he doesn't know that it can and in fact should be treated. But Ahmed is not alone here. In fact, many of us will never really voice our concerns about mental health, and there are different reasons for that. So some of us might think that, our peers are going to judge us for talking out loud, or that we ourselves are incapable of admitting that we have a problem. Other times, we fear that nothing much can be done anyways, because it's not treatable. Whatever it may be, what happens is that trauma frequently remains unrecognized, it goes unnoticed and unaddressed, and thus may worsen over time.
And in order to prevent just that, awareness is key. So if we want to reclaim back our humanity, we have to be aware. And the process is not always easy, that's the reality. Because in one of the shelters we went to, management and staff wanted to join one of our workshops. And then when everybody was there, it was going well. Suddenly, staff left halfway through, signaling to others that it was okay to leave early. So, for example, they didn't believe in the concept of empowerment because they were used to mediators and to police to come in the case of conflict and to settle a dispute coming in from outside. And sometimes we were frustrated because we were thinking, is this too ambitious? Is this a concept that can work, or doesn't it work? Is this more of a drop in the ocean, or can we really make a difference? And what does law and what does medicine have to do with it all in the first place? But remember, law and medicine are created to actually serve society and the people. And that's why we want to do this, because if we had given up then and there, we would not have attracted amazing talent and found amazing partners that share our vision and inspired others to do the same. And in fact, we would not be here today.
but luckily we are here today. And our message to you is very simple. Join us in embracing difficult conversations. We want to challenge you today to go out there and join this forum of dialogue. It doesn't matter whether you volunteer, whether you go to a local language cafe, whether you just reach out to your neighbor or your friends or your flatmate about it. Join us in having this dialogue, because together, if we have these conversations, we will become more aware and we can actually have a lasting impact on society. And as for Helen and myself, for us, this has been quite a journey, and it truly transformed us. Not just in realizing the power of dialogue when you do that work, but also to see what happens when you join forces and when you try to tackle a societal problem by making it just a little bit better and by going beyond a mere job description or a mere field of study. So remember Anne, the grumpy lady, the grumpy German lady who really hated our survey. This is a true story. So she actually stood up at the end of the workshop again, and Helen and I were looking at each other like, okay, is this happening again now for a second time? But she actually then said that she was so transformed by this experience and by Ahmed's story in particular, and that's why we shared it as well, that she wanted us to start a petition or a crowdfunding campaign because we should have more such workshops all across Berlin. Because Anne had understood a fundamentally important thing, that nowadays and today is not the time to close our eyes and ears to these difficult issues, but to go out there, enter a dialogue, enter a constructive and honest and open dialogue about these issues. Don't be afraid to share your story. Listen to other people's stories about life's challenges. Practice kindness, empathy, compassion, and most importantly, learn to embrace these difficult conversations that need to happen now. Thank you.
Thank you.